What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Joining me, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter. Chris, we talked about on a previous podcast how we went into the starters. Well, on Thursday, the starters weren't really out there except for Jared Allen. So it gives us the opportunity to go into the rotational players, the role guys, the people that are fighting for these last couple of spots to make it into the 10 to 11 man roster that Kenny Atkinson is going to put together. Chris, who stood out to you in Thursday's matchup with the Indiana Pacers?
Well, for me, it was Ty Jerome, Ethan. He got the biggest opportunity, obviously, because he was the point guard last night for the Cavs. He was running what was their first team. He was organizing their offense. He was responsible for having them play with the pace that they wanted to play with. He was responsible for getting them into their sets and organizing the offense and making sure everybody was in the right spots at the right times. And those are the things that the Cavs have raved about when it comes to Ty ever since they signed him last offseason. Like, Ethan, people forget, Ty Jerome is somebody that the Cavs have liked for 5 years now. Going back to the 2019 NBA draft, they wanted to draft him. They had the 26th pick. It was their second first-round pick that year. They had Ty Jerome circled. They were going to draft him. He got picked 2 picks in front of them, and they ended up with Dylan Windler, and we all know that story, right? But that tells you, just from this organization, when they were all together, like, that tells you how long they've had Ty on their radar. And President of Basketball Operations, Kobe Altman, has been watching Ty for even longer than that, when Kobe was not even yet in the NBA. Ty Jerome was somebody that he had an affinity for. And then if you talk about a couple of years ago, there was some conversation while Ty Jerome was in Golden State. Is he going to leave the Warriors? Is he going to stay with the Warriors? The Cavs offered him a 2-way contract at that point. He decided, no, I'm not going to leave for a new 2-way contract somewhere else. I'm going to stay in Golden State and latch on to their roster with a 2-way contract. And when he finally made the decision that it was time to move on from Golden State, the Cavs jumped on it. So that gives you an idea, beyond the fact that Ty has a relationship with Kenny Atkinson, beyond the fact that Ty has been really, really good throughout the course of training camp and in off-season workouts as well. That gives you an idea of how invested the Cavs have been and continue to be in Ty. And this was his opportunity, really, to show, one, that he's healthy, and two, that he is ready to be the backup point guard for the Cavs if they want to go that direction. And every time he has gotten a bigger opportunity with this organization, and every time he has gotten an opportunity to say, hey, like, I belong in the rotation, I am healthy, I am ready to go, I can be an asset for you guys, he has taken advantage of it. So last night, to me, Ethan, was about Ty showing that he is ready to be the backup point guard, and saying to Kenny Atkinson, if you are going to go with a backup point guard, if you're not going to just stagger Darius and Donovan and give them the responsibility, this is my way to solidify my spot.
And look, Kenny Atkinson gave praise to Ty Jerome because of how hard he's had to work to come back from that injury, that ankle injury that we know that kept him out for literally 80 regular season games last year and the entire playoffs as well. For me yesterday, it was how he began to continue to grow his game throughout the contest, right? While he's getting comfortable, being able to adapt to different situations, reading the defense, also getting to know the players that are along the court with him, right? Because in the first half, he didn't shoot the ball really well. He was 2 of 8 and 0 of 5 from three-point range in the first half, but he was doing other things to impact the game. He had 7 assists in the first half alone, and he was somebody that I thought, even when he was taking difficult shots, they could have been shots that he was comfortable or had practice doing those things, right? And as the game go on, like I'm saying, is that Ty Jerome was able to hit some more difficult shots later down the line because he got more comfortable. And it was like, okay, you're opening up more offense for other people. They're going to sag off you a little bit. You get a little bit more extra opening for your shots, and then you knock them down. Because as we've heard throughout training camp, he has been one of the better shooters on this team. That's why I was surprised by the percentages in the first half. I was like,
Mhm.
what's going on here? And then he kind of came back and showed who he was. And Chris, I just think it's really interesting how this backup point guard battle is going to go, especially because we talked about and we've had some Texans reach out talking about how Craig Porter Jr. is also in that contest. But I wanted to reiterate to them, to our listeners, that Ty Jerome has an advantage over Craig Porter Jr. that he can't control: size.
Yeah.
Ty Jerome
Yeah.
is 6'5" and can play the
Yeah.
1 and the 2. We saw him yesterday play next to Craig Porter Jr. and they were able to divvy up the roles. So that kind of gives you an idea of what he'd be able to do next to Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, whatever. Even if they were like, okay, you're the de facto point guard. Okay, you can run as the shooting guard, but also bring the ball up, because they want to play a positionless game of basketball where it's not just, okay, you bring it up, you're the point guard. No, they don't even want the ball in the backcourt that long. They say, get it out of your hands, get it up anyway.
Yep. And I thought Kenny Atkinson said something that sat with me for a couple of days. He said it the other day, Ethan. He said something along the lines of, "We want to be versatile and we want to be flexible when it comes to our lineups. And if you're a one position player in this system on this deep roster, it just makes your pathway to consistent minutes a little bit more difficult." And Kenny Atkinson said after the game last night, when talking about Craig Porter Jr., he was talking about ways that maybe he could get on the floor. And he said, well, I'm focused on his defense. I'm focused on how he would match up in certain situations. And that led me to believe that, and again, Craig can't control it, and he's a really good shot blocker for somebody his size. He's a really good rebounder for somebody his size. He's pesky as well. But that led me to believe that Kenny and this coaching staff believes that there would be limitations playing Craig alongside Donovan, alongside Darius. You know what I'm saying? Whereas for Ty, I think there is a belief based on his skill set and his size that he can play next to Donovan, and they can get away with that in a different kind of way. Or he can play next to Darius and they can get away with that in a different kind of way. So if we're talking about like weighing pros and cons, one player against the other player, Ty Jerome versus Craig Porter Jr., there are just more on the side of Ty Jerome, more working in his favor to be in the every night rotation as opposed to Craig Porter Jr. And that doesn't
And
mean
that's
that Kenny doesn't like Craig. And that doesn't mean that this organization doesn't like Craig. They do look at Craig Porter Jr. down the road as somebody who can be an NBA caliber backup point guard. But there's somebody else on this team that they look at and say he can be an NBA caliber backup point guard. And oh, by the way, we can play him at shooting guard too.
right. That was exactly where I was gonna go with that. Like, this isn't a knock on Craig. It's, we want you to develop and get better, and like they brought in Kenny Atkinson to do and Johnny Bryant to do, player development. Take your game to the next level, because if Darius Garland gets the boot, you might have to actually hop in there and play a different role than what you have now. And the other thing that
Speaking of
stuck out.
player development, by the way, speaking of player development, what did you make of Kenny Atkinson? I think this is the first time I've heard it. Other people inside the organization have said it privately behind closed doors, but I think it's the first time that I've heard somebody say it publicly. What did you make of Kenny Atkinson bringing up the charge thing with Jalen Tyson?
Bro, I was like, I don't know if he was making that like to bring it up as in like, oh, this is a statement, or like it's a possibility. And I think it's really
Mm,
interesting because you want to get him more time. You want to get him more opportunities. And he mentioned that the Charge is going to be a good team this year, right? Tyson was running with Zaire and Pete Nance and all those guys already. So he's getting comfortable playing next to those guys. The conversation then becomes, he's going to find a way, right? Kenny also said, don't count him out. Don't count him out. Like,
Yeah.
there is some underlying thing that is holding Jalen Tyson back, other than the fact that he has a lot of players ahead of him in the pecking order. But like, there is something holding him back from being able to get an opportunity, and don't count him out, because it could happen. But he also is viable to be a charge member as well.
So this was another quote that resonated with me. This is from Kenny Atkinson. And I think it shows you that coming into this situation and in the early days of camp, and this is a no duh statement, but there are people out there that think, okay, new coach, new system, he's just going to go in there with a clean slate and everybody's like on equal footing. And no, it doesn't work that way. There's like a talent hierarchy. There's like a seasoned experience hierarchy. And guys that have done it at the NBA level are going to get more of the benefit of the doubt. And they're going to get a longer leash and all those different things. And Jalen Tyson wasn't the first overall pick, right? He wasn't a top 5 pick. He was the 20th pick. So he's not going to get some of the assurances that some of these other guys get going to a bad team and having minutes just kind of like waiting for them, right? He got picked 20th on a team that went to the Eastern Conference semifinals. There just aren't the same assurances. There just aren't the same opportunities waiting for that guy. So the way that Kenny essentially said it is he's got to displace somebody that was already here, sort of thing. And to use Kenny's quote, he's going to put pressure on our rotation guys. How do you read that? I read that as saying he's not in the rotation. We have our rotation guys. They're in our mind. Some things can obviously change throughout the end of this training camp, other practices that we're going to have, and maybe some preseason games coming up. But in our mind, we've got our rotation guys. Maybe not set in stone, but at least written in pencil. And he's going to put pressure on those guys. And I read that, Ethan, as he is not in the rotation. And that's not a
True.
surprise to me. I don't
Right.
think he was ever in the rotation. I don't think I've said it numerous times on this podcast that it wasn't going to happen on opening night. But maybe as the season goes on, he's going to find his way into the rotation and on the court because he's that kind of guy, and he's going to be hard to keep all season long out of this rotation. But I never thought it was going to happen opening night. And I think that was last night, I think, was an indicator from Kenny that he kind of looks at it the same kind of way. The charge thing was very, very interesting to me, but it makes sense from the standpoint of, look, if we're trying to get this guy as many opportunities as possible, as many meaningful minutes as possible, those aren't happening in the NBA. Not on a team that is coming off an Eastern Conference semifinals appearance that has, a bunch of different options at that particular position or those particular positions that he would theoretically occupy.
Another conversation that I don't think we've had yet on this podcast, and what I'm interested in, is I know a lot of the two-way guys last year were up and down, right? They would come to the
Yeah.
Cavs games and sometimes go to the Charge games and sometimes not even play in those Charge games, but just be in the atmosphere and be like, oh, we're here because we're on two ways, right? What
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about is how much actual run these guys are going to get in the G League when it comes to these two-way guys, and in part with, like, is Luke Travers, is Amani Bates, is JT Thor going to be sent down and be like, hey, get some run when we feel like you've proven yourself, when we feel like you have done some things, then we'll bring you back up. It felt like to me last year, J.B. Biggerstaff was like, well, you're on a two-way. We want to have you here. We want to have you in the experience, but you're not going to play and you're going to be in street clothes. So, like, they weren't getting a whole lot out of that. And I feel like if Jalen Tyson becomes in this group, like, if he goes down there and has 1-2 games like Craig Porter Jr. did, it like, I do not belong down here. I do not belong in the
Mm-hmm.
G League. Then you bring him back up and
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, now you can sit at the bottom of the rotation. But guys like Amani Bates and Pete Nance and those kind of guys from last year were just sitting at the end of the bench and didn't get any of the reps that you would have thought that they would have gotten, even in non-important, non-specific or high-level competitions. And I just think it'll be interesting how they'll go about that this season.
Ethan, I think there are a few different layers to that. And I think you bring up a good point. And I think the best way that I can put it is that, to me, my understanding of those situations last year and my understanding of what the situation is going to be this year is what the organization feels like is best for that particular player and what the organization feels like is best for, well, the organization. So if we look at last year, Ty Jerome was lost in the second game of the regular season. And yeah, the Cavs had other ball handlers that were ahead of Craig Porter Jr. on the depth chart. But what if one of those guys got hurt in the middle of a game? What if one of those guys got in foul trouble? The Craig Porter Jr. presence on the team over and over and over again, even at times, Ethan, when he wasn't playing, was a situation where JB Bickerstaff wanted him in case. That was a conversation that JB had with the front office and said, I need to have him active in some capacity just in case something happens. And then they got to a point where, they felt really comfortable with Donovan Mitchell and they felt really comfortable with Darius Garland working his way back. And the front office said, hey, look, like, we're invested, JB, in Craig's development. Tell us if you're going to play him or not. If you're not going to play him, we want him to go to the charge. And we want him to get meaningful opportunities, meaningful reps. They run very similar type stuff in the G League so that it can carry over to the NBA level. So tell us if you're going to play him or not. Because if you're not, and that's fine if you're not, if you have other guys that you're comfortable with, we're going to send him down to the charge. With Amani, if you go back to the beginning of the season, I don't mean this to come across in a bad way, but last year, Ethan, he was the youngest player in the NBA. We all know his story at college and the maturity issues that popped up for him that were prohibitive and played a part in him being drafted 49th overall, right? So the Cavs looked at it and said, the thing that he needs most in terms of his development is structure, being around professionalism, being in a team environment that can make him feel a part of it, get him on a strength plan, get him on an eating plan. And like, all those things were easier for the Cavs to control and contain when he was with the NBA team as opposed to in the G League. There just aren't the same kind of resources in the G League that there are in the NBA. And I think the Cavs saw great value, even though Amani wasn't playing, even though he wasn't getting game reps and meaningful opportunities. The Cavs saw great value in a guy who, throughout his college days was labeled immature and not ready. They saw great value in Amani being around Donovan Mitchell and Tristan Thompson and like solidified pros that have done it the right way since they came into the NBA. And Amani could get tips on how to be a pro, how to go about, his game day routine, how to go about working out the right way, both on the court and in the weight room. Like, all of those things, they felt like Amani needed to learn to maybe one day be the best version of Amani Bates. Even if not the best player, Amani Bates, the best version of Amani Bates. So I think the same thing is going to happen this year, Ethan. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis. And they're going to say, all right, what does the individual player need? Does that match what we need? And if it does, all right, we're going to continue to lean into that. Like with Luke Travelers, I don't know how they feel about him because I haven't had these conversations yet because I've had so many other things on my plate that I've been focused on. But do they look at it and say, well, Luke needs a taste of the NBA in some capacity. Let's get him a feel for what the NBA is going to be like. And then once he has that taste and he gets some kind of experience, just the day-to-day, the travel, the routine, all that stuff that's different. Okay, now that he has a feel for that and he has an understanding of that, okay, G League. Because now we got to work on the game, right? So I think it's just going to be case by case basis with each individual person that's on a two-way, because not everyone um, is in the same tier. Not everybody has the same level of experience. Not everybody is as close to ready as somebody like Craig Porter Jr. was to make an impact last year.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Case by case basis makes sense. And Craig Porter Jr., like, that was a special occurrence, right? There was so much going on when it came to
Yeah.
that in the season, the injuries, the amount of injuries last season to the guard position for the Cavs, like that made sense. And also, he showed that he wasn't G League material. That's why they gave him
Right.
a standard contract, right? But
Yep.
Amani, right? That like I understand that he
Mm.
needed to get like the atmosphere and the practice and being in the facilities of the Cavs and being around the best of the best, people that have been to championships, been to MVP conversations, like all those different things. But he played 32 regular games combined between the NBA and the G League, right? There
Mm.
are 50 games minimum for the G League, right? He played in
Mm.
17 regular season games. And for me, it's like I wish they would have made the decision for him to go get reps, like you talking about with Luke Travers, who I think is a G League player and needs to get those reps, to go get those reps with the G League earlier on, rather than being like, okay, we want you to be here for half of the NBA season and then go down and get some reps. Like,
Mm.
if you're going to
Mm.
play him 15 games and average 8.9 minutes a game in non-competitive games or whatever in the NBA, like is he really learning from that? Like, and we
Mm.
saw it in the last regular season game against Charlotte. Like, he was still thrusted into a situation that was not advantageous for him. That was unfortunate at that in that manner, especially with Craig Porter Jr. going down in that game, and you had Imani playing a role that he hadn't played since he was in high school, point guard.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just think it's interesting for that. But I wanted to move on to a different player really quickly because I know we got to get out of here shortly. Um, Isaac Okoro has been
Mm.
playing in a different role again, right? He came into the league as a slasher, as someone that was known
Mm.
for his defensive prowess, somebody that could get to the rim at will, yada, yada, yada. Great. Then Donovan Mitchell gets to the team. Okay, we need you to be able to space the floor. We need you to be focused on defense as you are always going to be, but we also need you to enhance your three-point shooting. Did that. Now it's like, okay, great. You've done two different roles already. Now we want you to put it all together under Kenny Atkinson, right? And that is the comparison that Kenny Atkinson made for Isaac Okoro was Bruce Brown Jr. And I like
Mm.
that comparison a lot, not only because he's been on different teams with different players around him and has been forced to change his role, but for me, for the biggest step that Isaac Okoro needs to take is being able to adapt to the situations in game and adjust his game plan that way, saying who you have next to you. Like we saw when Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, all the starters except for Jared Allen were out against the Indiana Pacers on Thursday. You saw a completely different Isaac Okoro, right?
Mm.
I want him to be able to adapt that when he's in the game in a regular season game, when all those guys are available, be like, okay, if I'm on the court with Donovan and Darius, I need to be able to space the floor, do this. But if I'm with the second unit, I need to attack the basket. He gets caught up in, or he has gotten caught up in playing a singular role every single year that I feel
Mm.
like it's hard for him to change in that manner, but he has the skills to do both because when asked to, he can switch it like it's a light switch. Like
Mm.
I just think it's just going to be so interesting how he is able to adapt his game and take the blueprint from Bruce Brown Jr. because Bruce Brown Jr., we all remember, was very crucial to that Denver Nuggets
Yeah.
2023 NBA championship. But he also was known for being a small ball, 6'4" center for the Brooklyn Nets when they had Kevin
Mhm.
Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. So being able to do everything at a drop of a hat.
Yeah, I just wonder. This is the hard thing that I don't know the answer to, and I think we'll probably learn a little bit more here in this system with Kenny Atkinson, and if Kenny is going to give Isaac a little bit more freedom and responsibility and increase his role a little bit. Number one, like, not everybody can have a huge role. Like, that's just the way it is. Some guys are just going to have to blend into the fabric of the team, and Isaac's one of those guys who's probably going to have to blend into the fabric of the team. But, like, the other thing that I just don't know the answer to is there actually more to his game that we haven't been able to see, that the Cavs can actually pull out of him, or was he miscast by the previous coaching staff?
I think that's a tough question.
Because, right, because that answer is not the same for everybody. Like, there's this idea that if a guy's just really, really young, that there's more to his game. Okay, maybe, but what if there isn't? Like, what if he just is who he is? What if he just plateaus at some point? And what if Isaac has already reached that? I don't know. And it's hard to judge because so much of the conversation surrounding this organization throughout the last, 5-6 months has been about, hey, as plainly as they can say it without coming out and saying it, in blinking lights, the conversation has been, and like, this shouldn't be a surprise because players aren't going to put it on themselves, and the front office is not really going to be overly critical of the team that they constructed and the players that they acquired and the players that they paid big money to commit to. So it's kind of not a surprise that the big blinking flashing lights are all flickering, saying coaching was a problem, coaching was a problem, coaching was a problem. But when you hear that enough from enough people that you consider really, really smart, you stop and say, okay, maybe coaching was a problem. And maybe Isaac was caught up into that, right? So I just don't know that answer to that. And I'm excited if it happens and his role does expand and Kenny does allow him to do a few more things throughout the course of possessions or in certain lineups. I'm excited to see if Isaac can handle that while also staying within the fabric of the team. Because you brought up the point, Ethan, like, when other guys are out, his usage is going to go up. His opportunities are going to go up. His chances as a playmaker are going to go up. And we saw different stretches throughout the course of Isaac's career where different guys were out and he was thrust into a bigger role and he played like 30 to 35 minutes or 35 to 40 minutes and he was getting an opportunity to do all these other things. And it's like, well, okay, that's cool temporarily and thanks for your contributions. But when these guys come back, like, that's not going to be your role, right? So can you do it within the construct of how this team is built, how this team wants to play? And that's something that I'm going to be fascinated to find out. Because honestly, I don't know what that answer is with Isaac. I'm not sure how much more is in there on the offensive end and with his own offensive package.
Yeah, because Atkinson wants to draw him out and wants to build on him. But, I mean, you also talk about what Atkinson said last night, which is Isaac was a late signing, right? They had these guys here at Labor Day
Mm-hmm.
with Donovan Mitchell already getting these kinds of preparations. And I talked to Isaac last night one-on-one, and he was like, I'm still learning the new system, the
Right.
new terminology, the new everything that's going on. And I'm going to get better and get better. So by the time playoffs come around, I'm going to be able to do my job. And that's the biggest thing, right? Because Isaac Okoro, 82-game player, great. You are able to do
Yeah.
what you need to do in everything that you have done in your career so far. But when the playoffs come around, you're going to be able to show up. And
Yeah.
I just think it's really interesting how he's going to be able to fit in, if he's going to be adapt on a fly to different rotations and all these different things, because that's what Kenny Atkinson has said about almost everybody on this roster. I want to unlock them on
Yeah.
how they can play with different guys. What rotations work together? Which ones
Yeah.
are a little bit more difficult to piece together? Something
Forgive
that
me
we're
for
going to.
chuckling, Ethan. I just don't know how realistic that is. It's great to say those things. And of course you're going to say those things. Hey, Dean might have a little bit more to his offensive game. Hey, there might be a little bit more that we can get out of Isaac. Darius, there's more that we can get out of him. Jarrett, I don't know. I think he can expand his game a little bit, be more of a reliable mid-range shooter, be more reliable as a pocket passer. Evan Mobley. Oh, the excitement surrounding him as a potential perimeter player and a trigger for our offense and an offensive hub and somebody who, can play a bunch of different roles for us. And it's like, yeah, you can go down the entire roster and start thinking about these theoretical cases that play themselves out. And then you get into a season and you're like, how the hell are we supposed to do all this? Is there room enough for all of this? You know what I'm saying? So, I think Kenny has the right ideas in terms of we don't have to remake this whole thing. That's not what this situation requires. Little bits, pieces here or there. And if we give you the latitude to try these different things and see if there is more in there, and the answer is no, there's not, all right, then we go away from it. And I just think, Ethan, there are going to be a number of instances where the theoretical idea doesn't come to reality. And there's an understanding of, you know what? Maybe there's not that much more in there. Maybe this guy is just a specialist, or maybe this guy is just a complementary piece, and he has a specific role, and he can play to that role, but something more than that is asking a little bit too much from that particular player. And I don't want to cite specific examples of that or anything along those lines, but I think that's probably the way that it's going to end up playing itself out with most of these cases. Not every case, but I think with most of these cases.
I mean, as a new coach, you would want to have high hopes for all the new players and
Of
feel like
course.
as a player development specialist, you can bring out the best of everybody. But there's not always time for all of those things, and especially when you talk about just everybody on this roster is supposed to get better onto another level to reach their championship aspirations. I think Kenny has his work cut out for him, and maybe that's also learning this team as a coach that he can only take some players so far. But we're still learning. Kenny's still learning, and we're gonna have to wait and figure it out. The regular season's around the corner, but we still got 2 more preseason games. But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is a way so we can communicate, create a community, and you can send us your questions every week, and we'll get your answers right back to you to your phone, or you can be on the podcast a little bit, have your name, a little shout out. You know you like that. But to do this, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.